So the topic that we're looking at, as I said, is cyber safety. And as it happens, I actually work in cybersecurity. I have a bit of a background in that, in a very similar area. It's a very similar topic that I'm quite familiar with. And so currently, part of my job is to do incident response. So I do that for a large global organisation that I work for, which faces cyber attacks on a daily basis. And so when an individual or a group try to attack the company, the impact of that attack is potentially severe. And so it's my job to bring together the team that coordinates. It's my job to coordinate the team who responds to that. I also do what's called ethical hacking as part of my own business. So this is where organisations engage me to test their external cyber security posture. And so it's my job to then identify any vulnerabilities that organisation has and then try and exploit them and gain access to systems or breach their data or take control of their systems. And so when that happens, it's my job to then write up a report. I then give that to the organisation and then they go and fix the problems that I've found. And so the end goal is to try and make that company more secure. I've also done some interesting things in this space. So I've also worked with the federal police, not for them, to track down people who have been missing. And I've done that using what's called OSINT techniques. So that's a little bit different to hacking, but very, very similar techniques. And to do that, I led a team of hackers, and we were assigned to track down a few missing people. And one of them actually was a cult leader who was based in Western Australia. And we found some very compelling links to a new identity that individual seems to have created themselves in a different part of the world. As mentioned earlier, part of my day job involves bringing together a team of people to respond to cyber attacks, and sometimes that looks like a team of up to 20 people, so that's made up of people who have skills with servers and networks, forensics, communications, and together we respond to cyber attacks. And I've been in situations in the past where, because of the nature of some incidents that have been potentially devastating, the CEO has been, even the CEO of the company has kind of been bringing me coffee and trying to make sure that my job is, that I've been able to do my job and that the organisation has been able to stay safe. And finally, one of the organisations that engaged me is actually one of Australia's biggest cyber safety companies, which is very topical for our talk tonight. So this company has a vested interest in keeping families and students safe. And so I can't say exactly what I did because it's protected by non-disclosure agreement, but it was certainly a very fun and interesting engagement. And as a result, they're now more secure than what they were as an organisation. So for a bit of a lighter take on what I do, so part of being able to respond to cyber attacks effectively requires the ability to monitor your defences for any attacks. And so to do that, large organisations often have what's called a security operations centre, which is a room where people watch for and observe for cyber attacks. And this is an example of what a typical cyber operations centre looks like, a bit of a small one. Some organisations, they're absolutely massive. So the person on the left-hand side, that's what my colleagues think I do, because I'm a bit short and snappy during an incident. The operations centre that we have is actually based in Sydney, and it looks very similar to this. So when my grandma heard the word hacker, I think she thought I was a packer. So that's what my grandma thinks I do. My wife, well, I deliberately picked an iStock photo to make the point that it's all fake. I don't do that. And this is what I spend most of my time doing. So having worked in cybersecurity, I've seen and heard of all different kinds of cyber security related risks. The types of cyber risks I spend time defending against or responding to are mostly cyber attacks from criminal groups or sometimes nation states, which tend to be more advanced. For example, you may have heard that Iran has spent a lot of time recently trying to attack organisations, particularly those in the United States, and it has caused quite a lot of damage doing so. And so my team spend time preparing for and mitigating for those types of attacks. And so the advent of the internet and technology has meant that everything is now connected and is vulnerable to cyber attack. Anything that's connected is vulnerable. Anything that's connected to the internet. And even if it's not, if it's technology, it's still vulnerable. And so these days it's now fairly normal to hear in the news terms like cyber weapons or cyber attacks or cyber warfare or cyber strikes. And it's because now and then you hear that some nation has launched a cyber strike or attack against another nation's infrastructure. But what does it actually look like? So as I said before, any technology is vulnerable. And so a good example of this, and we won't spend too much time on this because it's not entirely related, but a good example of how this is, of a cyber attack is, can be seen in Israel's new train line. So Israel has been building a new smart train that services Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And this train is actually subjected each month to 10 million cyber attacks, which target the train systems directly. So this is not the website of the train or the organisation who manage the train. This is direct attacks at the train itself. So what does that actually mean? Well, many of these attempts are intel gathering. So they're mostly trying to gather reconnaissance or information about what the train is doing and how it works. But sometimes adversaries like Iran might try and launch an attack on the train. So what that could result in is the derailing of the train, or the uncontrolled acceleration of the train, or instantaneously making it break. Because all of those controls are obviously managed by a computer and connected to the internet in the case of Israel's train. So Israel actually has a team of people whose job it is to be dedicated to defending against cyber attacks that are directed at the train itself. There's a team of people who sit in a room in a security operations centre and manage that. Another example of a cyber attack happened back in 2017 when Russia decided to switch off power across Ukraine. Obviously, Russia and Ukraine don't get along particularly well, and this is one way for Russia to have a bit of a jab at Ukraine. And so when this happened, the streets were silent. Obviously, the power went out. The CBD lost power for days. There was no heaters, no lights. Obviously, nothing to keep the freezer going. So it was a nightmare for days for a lot of citizens of Ukraine. You can also think about what effect that has upon the Ukrainian military and their ability to mobilise. Most people don't realise that cars these days, most of them are vulnerable to cyber attack as well. There was one article in the news recently where a hacker demonstrated that they had the capability existed for any malicious attacker to create havoc in traffic around the world if they used certain vulnerabilities that existed. And so you can see that mankind has really created itself a big problem with technology over the last 10 to 15 years by connecting everything. And of course, the concerning thing is that terrorists are now starting to try and learn that capability. And to be honest, there's many, many more examples. We could spend many hours on this, but the final example I'll show here is of how technology has changed piracy on the high seas. So a lot of pirates, they're now high-tech. Instead of moving up to a ship in a high-speed vessel mounted with a machine gun or some other kind of weapon, they're instead sitting at their computers thousands of miles away, either stealing assets on ships or controlling the systems of the ship. And so there's a very brief example of some of the different types of cyber attacks that are out there. And obviously, planes are connected, our nation's infrastructure, power, gas, water, all of that stuff is managed and is vulnerable. And I work for a company that manages critical systems. So if those systems are attacked, that actually can potentially result in people dying because of the nature of the systems. So cybersecurity is a real concern for me, and I see it and work with it on a daily basis. But we're going to now look at, more importantly, cyber risks for individuals and families. And I'm going to start off by giving you some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that the risks that we're going to look at this afternoon relating to families are really far more dangerous and more insidious than what a nation-state attack might be, or a crime group who's trying to hunt you down. And I say that because they're more dangerous to your walk in Christ if your goal is to be in the kingdom. If they're not managed properly, they threaten your ability to develop skills like self-regulation and things that are essential in order to be in the kingdom. But not just us. They're an issue for our children. If we don't manage these risks properly as parents, we won't give our children a decent chance to grow up and develop essential characteristics like self-regulation, as I mentioned, those characteristics which Christ expects to see in us when he returns. And so that's the tough news, and we'll walk through how to manage some of those risks. But the good news, on the other hand, is that managing those risks is far less complex than protecting yourself from an Iranian nation-state cyber attack or an attack from an organised crime group. You don't have to sit at home in your bomb-proof bunkers with nation-state grade cybersecurity and a team of incident responders at your beck and call. The stuff we're talking about today is really simple. So we're going to focus mainly on those aspects of cyber which have a negative impact on our walk in Christ. I'm not really going to go into detail about how to protect your privacy and your data and all that type of stuff. If you want to know more about that, feel free to ask afterwards. And so we're going to start off with the same and end with the same key message. And if we follow this as parents and as teenagers, then we're on the right path. And so here's the key message. 3 steps on how to protect ourselves and our families. So the first is we need to understand the risks. The second is we need to build awareness. And the third is we need to take control. So we're going to dive into these quickly. So what are the challenges? What are the risks that we're talking about that we need to be aware of? Now, we simply don't have enough time to go through all of them today. And I'd say there's a good chance that the ones we're about to go through you may be already aware of, but we'll work through them quickly. So these are some fairly concerning statistics. 8 to 11 is the average age that children are first introduced to explicit content online. Almost 50% of 13 to 18-year-old children have sent an explicit content about themselves to others. 80% of teens say that they're on their phones at night when their parents think they're asleep. And today's youth spend an average of 9 hours a day consuming media. 60% of families who give their children smartphones do so between the ages of 10 and 11, and that happens to be the same age at which the average child is exposed both voluntarily and involuntarily to explicit material. Now, that's probably stating the obvious for some of us. Once children get free access to technology, they're immediately in a position of risk without even knowing it, unless we're ahead of that. And so those are only a few statistics. As I said before, there's many out there which are really concerning. They're all showing the same story, the story that the world in which we now live, children face a far higher risk of exploitation than what they have in the past. Now, when I talk about exploitation, I'm not just talking about the really bad stuff you hear on the news, although that is, of course, one of many online concerns. I'm also talking about the really basic stuff, like the apps and the videos that our children are exposed to. Many of them seek to exploit children in different ways. It could be as simple as the advertisements which pop up and which you as a parent never see because you're not watching what the child is watching. And I have heard of cases where some videos have been intentionally designed to look like videos that are prepared and appropriate for children, but they've actually been adjusted to introduce the children to explicit content partway through the video, which is typically when the children are not watching, but the parents are not watching. So as mums and dads, we need to be aware of these types of risks. So what is the impact of exposure to this content? Research has shown that this type of exposure has a massively detrimental impact on a child's ability to essentially grow up and develop properly. It has a detrimental impact on their ability to treat others with respect. And often the destructive behaviours that are observed online are later brought into a courtship or a marriage with devastating consequences, because the child has grown up with this preconditioned understanding of how they think relationships are supposed to work. And sadly, this type of stuff is happening to children inside and outside of our ecclesial environment. So as parents, we can't just assume that because we're Christadelphians that our children are okay. We also can't assume that because we're doing everything, we also can't assume that we're doing everything that we need to be doing to mitigate and manage this type of risk. So another issue is the amount of time that children spend online and teenagers. So again, research has proven that excess exposure to digital media, whether it be through gaming, binge watching movies, excessive social media usage or internet time, has a very negative impact on both adults and children. So leaving kids to spend hours watching videos or gaming leads to the following risks or situations. So it produces significant delays in developmental milestones, which affect social, interpersonal and literacy capacity. It damages a child's ability to learn self-regulation and attention skills. It increases the physical, psychological and behavioural the potential of those disorders. It results in difficulty determining what is real and what is fantasy, and a heightened state of stress, overstimulation and less personal connection. And so those are just the mental and psychological impacts. Of course, they have a direct impact on morality. And this isn't just a risk for children. It's a problem for adults, as I'm sure you are already aware. And I want to consider the issue for adults from a slightly different angle, with some insights from the Apostle Paul about how to use our time generally. Paul, when he was writing to the Hebrews, spoke about the brethren and sisters in the ecclesia who are not growing and maturing in the word. In Hebrews 5 verse 11, Paul says in his writing, "There is much more that we would like to say about this, but it is difficult to explain, especially since you are spiritually dull and don't seem to listen. You have been believers so long now that you ought to be teaching others. Instead, you need someone to teach you again the basic things about God's word. You are like babies who need milk and cannot eat solid food. For someone who lives on milk is still an infant and doesn't know how to do what is right. Solid food is for those who are mature, who through training have the skills to recognise the difference between right and wrong." And so Paul took issue with the fact that the Hebrews were not reading the word of God and therefore not growing in God's eyes. And we have a purpose as brethren and sisters and as adults. It's our responsibility to be growing and maturing in God's word. And we can't do that if we're not reading it. Earlier during the week I sent around a video you might have seen it, of Iranian immigrant brethren and sisters in the United Kingdom who are learning about the word of God. And you can just see the intensity on their faces as they soak up every single word that the speaker says, no matter how boring the speaker's voice is. They're so desperate to learn and grow in the word of God that they commit every fibre of their being to it. And it was a wonderful thing to see. If you didn't, I send out via newsletter, so have a look at that. So on our journey to grow in God's word, are we studying his word each week, like those Iranians? Are we reading it every day with an intense interest and desire to grow in the knowledge of his word, so that we can make better life choices? Or is our time consumed with distractions, which ultimately waste the potential that God has given us to grow in his word and serve him and each other? So before Christ left, he told us to occupy till he comes. And that applies both to our online lives and our offline lives. We have to pick and choose the time that we spend online and do it wisely. We have to ask ourselves, is what I'm doing online right now, is it of value to God? And so those are just a few of the risks that we've got to be aware of as adults and young people and children, and I'm sure most of us are most likely already aware of them. It's always good to be reminded of them. So what do we do? How do we manage these risks? There's no way we're going to be able to cover all of them, how to manage all of them. But what we can do is look at, as I said before, the 3 steps. We're going to look at the 3 top tips on how to manage cyber safety risks at home and in families. And so the first point that we're going to make is it's incumbent on all of us to understand the risks that are out there. We all understand the need to learn to swim safely if we're going into deep water. We learn the risks and the challenges of doing so that we can avoid them. The same thing happened when we first learnt to drive. We learnt that we had to avoid certain risks in order to stay safe on the road. But how do you become aware of these risks as an adult and as parents of young people? Particularly given that a lot of them are changing and quite often there's new risks and challenges that are emerging that parents are quite often not aware of. Well, there's some great resources that we can use to stay ahead of this changing landscape. The first resource, and probably the most comprehensive, is esafety.gov.au, which is provided by the eSafety Commissioner. And on this site is a wealth of resources for parents and adults and teenagers on how to manage the different risks. A great thing about this site is that it drills down into different problem areas and also covers off on risks that are generally associated with specific age groups. So if you've got children that are of a specific age, then you're quite likely to find age-appropriate advice on there. The great thing about this site is that so the example in the screenshot here is on gaming. So this page provides a breakdown of some of the concerning indicators to be aware of, to look for, and the things to avoid. Think You Know is the second resource, and this was established by the Australian Federal Police, I think because they were fed up with seeing so much exploitation and very little education being done to stop it. And this is a particularly good resource for parents who are looking for better ways to manage cyber safety at home. The Australian Institute of Family Studies also has a wealth of other resources that you can use to grow your understanding of the various different risks and also how to manage them at home. So for each of these 3 resources that we just looked at, you can subscribe to their newsletters, you can follow them on social media, you can read their resources, you can watch the educational videos that they provide. And by doing so, you can stay ahead of what's changing. You can improve your understanding over time of the different things you need to be looking for. So the second top tip is to build awareness. Because there is an awareness problem, quite often children are placed in a risky situation before their parents even become aware of it. And if we made our children aware of the risks to begin with, then they're better equipped to manage their time online. And so talk to your children, explain to them the different risks. And this isn't just an issue for parents and children. We tend to focus on children because they're far more vulnerable than adults. But the reality is that adults who are not aware of the challenges are just as vulnerable themselves to different risks. And that's one reason why very large organisations pour millions of dollars into training intelligent adults in the world on how to stay safe when using the internet. Because it's an issue for everyone. And so when we talk about awareness, we need to be sharing the resources that we're aware of. We need to be sharing the knowledge that we have about how to manage these things on this topic with other people, with our friends, our siblings, our families, children's, uncles, aunties, peers. So the final top tip is to take control. There's a few ways in which we can do this. So if you're facing a specific problem area in your life, then as I mentioned before, there's resources online that help to deal with specific problems for specific age groups. We looked at them briefly before. It might be that you find your child is using a new app that you've never heard of before. How do you know that app isn't facilitating cyberbullying or unwanted contact or the sharing of explicit content? The eSafety site is starting to provide guidance on specific apps. and websites, so you can check those out there. One very interesting creative way to encourage a discussion on cyber safety with children in a family environment is by creating a family contract together. Now, this is not a religious thing. This is something that has been created by people in the world. People in the world who have enough knowledge to know that this stuff has an adverse impact on people if not managed properly. And so the idea here is that the parent requires that the child read and understands the contract before signing, after which they're allowed to access either the internet or a mobile device or something else, another device potentially. And the value here is that for those parents who aren't familiar with the risks out there, they can also learn what is reasonable to expect of their children. And so I'll just read as an example some of the points to give you an idea of some of the types of things that it covers off on. So the child would be they would be learning to tell my parents or a carer if I see something that makes me feel upset, uncomfortable or scares me. To be aware of people online, that people online are not always who they say they are and do not always tell the truth. To let my parents supervise where I go online, as I understand that they do this to help keep me safe. To not give out personal information about myself, my family, my friends or others online, including full names, addresses, phone numbers or schools. To not share my passwords or usernames with anyone but a parent or a carer that I understand, and I understand they will only use it if they're worried about me or my safety. I will always treat others the way that I want to be treated online, with respect. I will make sure that all of my accounts are always set to private. I'll never agree to meet anyone in person that I've only met online. So there's a number of things here, and obviously some of these are going to be relevant in certain circumstances, because obviously, as a child grows, you may be at the stage where you have only allowed your child access to one social media platform instead of 5. Whatever the situation you're in, you have a way to help manage that and set the expectation from the beginning. Now, and obviously once that expectation is set, the child knows how they're expected to behave, and you can reinforce that on a quarterly or a biannual basis if you want to. So there are also physical controls out there. So you can use technologies and software to help control and manage the process of keeping you and your children safe. And there's a range of products out there which do a great job of this. And they help do things like track online behaviour, including calls and SMS, monitoring for and alerting on risky behaviour, balancing screen time, restricting certain applications or services or sites. And they do this across all of your devices, so not just your computer or your home internet, on your mobile device when you're outside of your home environment as well. And they do a fairly effective job at this. One of my favourite products which does this, we use this at home, is Family Zone, because they provide a product that covers everything from home internet, home wireless, and even mobile device usage when outside of the home environment for children who may have mobiles, if they do. So Family Zone also provides risk ratings for different apps and websites in case you are unsure of something. And it also allows you to balance and manage screen time for children. And finally, and most importantly, to ultimately protect ourselves, we need to stay focused on protecting our hearts. So when a child is growing and developing, when a child is growing and developing a sense of self-control, the physical controls are really important. But at some point, that child will grow up and enter the real world. And so as they grow and they begin to learn self-control, the physical controls can be removed over time until they're completely gone. And by the time those controls are no longer in place, that child needs to have a heart that is passionately focused on serving God. And that is the ultimate control, self-control. And so ultimately this is a question of the heart as the child grows older. By the time a child has grown into a young adult, the only thing that stops them from developing destructive habits online is their heart, as the proverb puts it. I'm not only talking about, as I said before, the exposure to really explicit or intense content that can be damaging. I'm talking about the ability for a young person to self-regulate their time on the internet, self-regulate their time on social media if they're allowed to have it or if they choose to have it, or self-regulate their time on a mobile device. Not because it's a good idea, but because they realise that they need to prioritise their time wisely for God. God gave them time, so how are they going to invest it? And so we're talking about developing in our children, in our young adults, and ourselves, a mindset that is focused on God, invested emotionally in God, passionate for God and his ways. And that happens by inspiring our children to love God and his word, to have a heartfelt desire to focus their premium time on reading God and serving him. So the Psalms tell us, how can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word. And so this desire to live a life of holiness before God needs to be felt in the heart, decided in the mind, read in the word, and enacted in life. And that's the ultimate gift, ultimate control we can give to our children is self-control. The self-control, the ability for them to be able to do that. And so to summarise the third top tip, how to take control. We looked at the concept of the family contract, which is a helpful mechanism for parents and teenagers and children to use. We looked at the example of physical controls, which are available through products like Family Zone, which can block and monitor children usage and the usage of teenagers. And finally, we looked, most importantly, at the necessity to bring our children up with a sincere heart to serve and please God first and foremost, so that by the time they're young adults they have a sense of regulation, self-regulation and self-control that is driven by their desire to serve God above all else. So that's all for this afternoon.